joining us. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm sort of making things this way. So we are here to talk about the state of the art and design market, and anybody who gives you a definitive answer on this is making it up, because there are things that we just can't know. I would love to introduce our panelists, starting with in the center, Jodi Pollack, who has quite a few titles, so I don't read them. She is the chairman and co-worldwide head of 20th Century Design, in addition to being the chairman of Major Collections. So this next week is major for you, coming up with the auctions. We have Dan Krause, who is the founder of her eponymous jewelry sales company. She is specialist in signed vintage jewelry by the likes of Cartier, Van Cleef, Boivin, and on and on. And I encourage you to go see her booth after this, because she has the most spectacular things, much like the earrings she's wearing now. Jill Newhouse founded her gallery in 1980 and is a specialist in 19th and 20th century works on paper. And one show I want to call out is currently on view, Women, Subject and Object, Painting and Sculpture from 1850 to 2025. So if you're interested in works by Millet and Pissarro next to works by Kiki Smith and Elizabeth Peyton, I would encourage you to go. So with that, and my name is, just for background, Christina Evans. I have been with the Financial Times for 15 years. I cover a wide range of subjects, everything from travel to fashion to philanthropy. And I write quite a lot for the newspaper as well. So with that, we will just kick it off. In researching this panel, based on the last numbers that are coming from London and Paris, the big sales this past month, the market overall, it seems to be down by 12% from the last year, but the sales went very well, according to the experts, including Puck, Marion Maneker, we listened to him. I would say the trends that I could ascertain, fine art, particularly above the $10 million range, has had a very difficult time. Design is way up, it seems, and vintage jewelry, you're in the catbird seat, particularly with the price of gold and things like that. So tell me a little bit about where you say things now. Is it volatile? Are you seeing a lot of movement in the works on paper space?
Do I press the button here? Or I think it's working, yeah. Well, my specialty, as you explained, thank you, I stretch into contemporary work in an effort to spread out, to respond to the way I think shopping has changed for art in the last couple of years, especially post-pandemic. So what we're seeing at the gallery, since July, it's been quiet at the top end, I have to say. I don't think world events are contributing to a peaceful frame of mind for shopping. But it's interesting to me that you're saying that the design market has shown a statistical uptick, because I feel that I think we're all shopping all the time now. And that's what I think has changed with Instagram, with all the social media. You click on a sweater that you like and they send it back to you in an email 40 times, as does Sotheby's when you click on something that you like. So fine, I think that people are looking at everything all at once. Whereas when I started the gallery, and I would say for the first 25 years, I was working closely in a specialty. I was dealing with pre-impressionist artists through impressionist artists. There were specific collectors that were driving the market. It was a much more specific and describable market or world. So I think the art market responds to, the way the world changes. So in that sense, it's interesting to me that the design world has picked up. But I will say, I think that there's a price adjustment in a lot of areas going on too. And I think that there's real opportunity right now in a lot of areas. So.
Mm-hmm. Jodi, tell us a little bit about the design space and what you're seeing generally.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me today. Thrilled to be here. I started at Sotheby's about 25 years ago, and we were talking about this a bit earlier. The phenomenon of collecting back then was so radically different to what we're seeing today. And I totally agree with you that people are shopping, at all times. But I feel like, the design market is very much often skewed with what we are seeing at the very top end. And it's sort of like a tale of two markets. The world of 20th century design is, first of all, very vast. We cover so many different subcategories, from pre-war to post-war to contemporary design. And very often what we are reading about in the headlines that continues to reach new heights are the markets for Salon, the markets for Giacometti, the markets for French mid-century, post-war, Jean Royer, Jean Prouvé, and also Tiffany. That's become, a real sort of blue chip, market for us. I think, things that are very identifiable. So, a lot of times what we are seeing make, 7-figure, 8-figure prices are, markets that are concentrated in those key areas. And those are obviously very market driven and are where so many of the fine art collectors, like the major collectors of modern and contemporary art that are migrating into the design world, are focusing their attention. These sort of like areas, these artists that have great crossover appeal. But I think that the big phenomenon that I've been seeing develop over the last 5 years is that more and more major art collectors, really at every level, but certainly at the very top level, are discovering that design is an amazing vehicle for them to elevate the presentation of their art collections. Mm-hmm. If you have $1 billion art collection, you have to really pay attention to the furniture, that's in your room. You're not going to go out and buy restoration hardware, upholstered furniture, or, have crap furniture. Uh-huh. You really have to say, all right, what aligns with the art? What, frankly, aligns with my taste? And I think design in many ways has become also a vehicle for people to really personalize their collections and to show a mark of their taste, their sophistication, the quirkiness of their attitudes, their character, and also their value system in some cases. So I think design, I like to say it's sort of like, the secret sauce to a lot of people's collections. It allows them to make things very deeply personal. So, that's, we're recognizing that trend and obviously really leaning into it and catering to it.
Perfect. So you mentioned the $1 billion art collection. So with that, am I seeking Perriand and Corbusier, and what kinds of things are you seeing a demand for?
Well, it depends what's on your walls, and it also sort of, again, depends on your aesthetics and your taste level. I think for collectors that have more antiquarian taste, maybe they're focused on Impressionist and early modernism, they might strive towards pre-war design, and they might be looking at the masters like, Emile Jacques Roulemond and Cherot and Prince and Rateau and Giacometti. If you're, really more inclined towards contemporary, then yes, you're going to be leaning more towards post-war European and French and contemporary design. So I think it really sort of depends, again, on what the aesthetics are. And then, the other big trend that we're seeing is, really more eclecticism in collecting, where people, are not, they're not scared to really mix things from different centuries, different genres, different countries. And I think, again, that layering, that sort of eclectic mix is what really personalizes a collection and puts your own imprint on it.
Okay, great. So Dana, thinking about jewelry as sort of a wearable collection, what are you seeing a demand for now in particular?
I think the thing, am I working here? Thank you for including me. I think the thing that distinguishes our world, the jewelry world, from the fine art world, is that it is so personal. And the one thing I've learned, I've also been in this business for 25 years, is that what we do is predictably unpredictable. And so I don't look so much at trends as maybe you guys do. What we're seeing, we just came off a show in San Francisco and then are doing this show, which is a design show. And so the people who come here tend to be very design driven. And I think New Yorkers this market tends to be a very polished market. I think these are a very sophisticated customer. And we're seeing here a great interest in Hemmerly, in Jarre, a very elevated demand. In San Francisco, we just sold some very traditional vintage pieces. My firm, DK Farnham, has always focused on design and unique design, collectible design. And so we sold a lot of vintage Van Cleef, vintage Cartier. We sold some Belperron, Suzanne Belperron. I'm wearing a Boivin starfish. We have one of these, which is very rare. This is circa 1940, and it's got all sorts of paperwork. And we're seeing an increased, I think with technology, people are becoming much more sophisticated in the questions they ask and in the knowledge base with which they come to us. They ask good questions. I'm not hearing so much, is this a good investment? I'm hearing more, tell us about the design component. Tell us about how we can mix this in with the rest of our collection. And I think our customers probably tend to be very similar. Jill?
Yeah, the objects are smaller than when you talk about somebody who's buying furniture or putting things in a setting. And I would really agree with shoppers being much more sophisticated because the information is available. But I also think that when you talk about the art market, which is your job, I think is quite difficult because it is a series of random events that we're all trying to make sense of. So, and people should always be guided by their personal taste. And that's not so easy, that's not so easy to establish. It requires a lot of looking, a lot of patience. I think furniture is slightly different.
I think to your point, I think people are, our business has always been, we've never had a store. That's very intentional. And so I think our customer there's been a trust level because we deal so much on the internet in addition to doing shows and in-person meetings. And I think people are doing their research. And I think, but to your point, I always say to people, do not look at this as an investment, buy what you love. And I'm sure you hear that again and again and again.
Interestingly, I thought our conversation would be a lot to that. I'm not hearing that question so much either anymore. Of course, which is great because when I started talking about the long-term value of the objects I was selling, I would just walk away from that conversation because I think it's an impossible thing to predict. I would always say if you buy good quality things and it's worth the price you're paying for it right now in this moment, that's the best you can do. And making sure that authenticity is in place and condition is in place. And even the auction house is so much more helpful with posting the condition reports on everything. Information is readily available. You just have to take the time to source through it, to read it.
Right. Speaking of pricing, let's talk about gold right now because that is something that it continues to boggle the mind. And this question probably is most specifically for the two of you. On view right now at Sotheby's coming up in the next sale is Maurizio Catalan's aptly named solid gold toilet called America. And obviously you're dealing with the price of gold on a daily basis. So where do you see that going? And can you tell us a little bit about that particular lot in the sale? I know there's been talk about it being priced according to gold on the day. Obviously there's a reserve, but can you tell us a little bit about that?
Maybe somebody will melt it.
Well, I think it's a really brilliant, clever strategy, and I think speaks so much to, just the spirit of Catalan's work and his creativity and what he's all about. And very cleverly, the estimate is framed around the price of gold for that given day. But, I have to also assume that, the estimate, knowing where the price of gold is hovering, is also largely framed around the artist's, the parameters of his, top pieces. And a lot of thought was also put into that in terms of market precedents and comparables. Right. But we'll have to see where the price of gold is next week.
Right. Dana, and to you.
Well, congratulations on having that piece. That's an interesting, we'll all be watching that. Jamie Dimon is saying that gold is going to go up to $10,000 an ounce. Whether that will happen or not, who knows? It's just been volatile, and I said before, predictably unpredictable. Having said that, thank you. Having said that, I think we are hearing people wanting to melt things. And most of what I do is not the kind of stuff that you would melt under any circumstances. It would just be a crime. I did melt a very large collection a few years ago that was some of the ugliest jewelry I've ever seen. It was hideous, and it was an estate situation, and there were a number of family members, and they needed the money. And we had tax implications, so we had to deal with the financial aspect of it more than anything else, and we just had to move quickly. At that point, I think gold was about $1,600 an ounce, and that family is probably kicking themselves, but so be it. Yeah.
Speaking of pricing, and I should know this, forgive me, are any of your businesses affected by the tariffs? Or are you not paying on there? Okay, tell me a little bit.
Not so much me, but my colleagues, yes. And I'm hearing some international people here. There are a lot of international people here at the show. And I think there was trepidation among some of the dealers about coming here because of that.
I think it's going to definitely have a big impact on the field for design, for furniture, furnishings, lighting.
Furniture is tariffable, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think we're all trying to really understand the implications. It feels very fluid. And I think that 2026 is going to, obviously a big year where we're going to see what the actual impact is. But, assuming that this is all applicable to furniture that is, not unique, not in editions or limited series, and tariffs are applicable, I think what we will see is a greater move towards sort of geo-targeted consignments, where if you're a consignor in Europe, you're going to be reluctant to send that consignment to New York and vice versa. So that very well may have a pretty serious impact just on how people are transacting, both on the sell side, but also on the buy side, based on what these tariffs are. But, on the flip side, I think when you're looking at the very top end of the art market and a collector is looking at something and it's a once in a lifetime buying opportunity, and that you're perhaps never going to see this again on the market, I think all of these rules, then, start, having less relevance. So I think it's going to be a case by case situation.
And more for the seller than the buyer, more impactful.
Well,
Yes.
I would say one thing we're seeing is that fine art is not tariffable at the moment. I think the uncertainty and the changeability around the tariffs is what is concerning. But for example, shipments from Europe to us, FedEx has been automatically putting on a 10% tariff, and then you have to get on the phone with them and explain that you're shipping an object of fine art. So I think the uncertainty is huge in it, and it's a psychological point. It's the same thing as sales tax. People just don't like the extra charges. So we haven't seen an effect so much. I think if there's less shipping between the United States and Europe, that would be really unfortunate in other countries. Speaking as someone who deals in European art, especially. So.
Yeah. Okay, great. Speaking of selling, let's talk a little bit about the fairs and the profusion of them and the importance of them. Dana, we can start with you. Are they important in terms of having a face-to-face with your buyers and sort of relationship-based? Is that piece important?
It's critical. And what we do, because we don't have brick and mortar situation, these fairs are an important opportunity to not only see people we already know, some of whom are sitting in this audience, but to meet new people. And they do a bang-up job at this particular fair of bringing people in. We were absolutely mobbed on opening night, so much so that people were complaining that they couldn't get to the counter to actually see the jewelry. And I think that these fairs have gone up and down also in popularity. But this particular fair, I think some of them are standouts. They do a great job publicizing, and I think people's comfort level coming to a venue like this is there. This is a vetted show, and so ahead of time, everything has to be just what it's supposed to be and authenticated. That word authentic comes up again and again. Some other shows, Jill and I were talking about this before this, some shows are better than others and better attended, and that changes from year to year, so you just have to sort of decide what's right for your particular product and your customer.
I know that Art Basel is going to Doha. Do you see an uptick in your sales from that part of the world?
It hasn't affected me. Although the Louvre Abu Dhabi has collected French 19th century paintings, I haven't had any personal interactions with them, so I can't say that it's affected me personally. So,
Okay, great. And for you, a lot of Middle East?
Well, the Middle East, I think, is a huge opportunity. Certainly, where my company Sotheby's is really leaning into, because I think that's really where we're seeing the next big generation of growth coming into the markets. So, for instance, we're having our first auction in Saudi Arabia coming up in February, which will be a really interesting event, and we continue to make investments in that region with the idea of cultivating many new buyers coming from those different countries. But going back to the conversation about the fairs, I just wanted to make an observation. Sitting in my position at the auction houses, we have to really base everything that we're doing very much on real-time data and the pulse of what we're seeing happening in the market. So the fairs, believe it or not, are very important to us because we're hearing all of the collectors, all of their feedback, the anecdotal stories of what's happening, and it's the way that I see it. It's a very big ecosystem. And obviously the dealers, the galleries play a very, very important role in that ecosystem. So we are always, going to all of the different events and hearing what everybody's observations are, what's trending at a fair, what's everyone talking about, what is the buzz, because that informs us very often about how we might want to curate our sales and, just the observations, the like really critical feedback that we're hearing from the market.
Okay, great. This kind of goes for both of you, and I think I know the answer for Dana, but are you seeing more emotional buying now versus practical investing? Are people being more impulsive? We're talking about people shopping all the time now. What are you seeing?
I am seeing the fact, yes, I think we just experienced some wonderful, I guess you would call it emotional buying in San Francisco. Anecdotally, there was one woman who had just gone on Ozempic and lost a ton of weight, and she wanted to reward herself, and she purchased a high six-figure pair of bracelets that were really unusual, and she knew nothing about them, but she was a technology person who was very erudite and interested in all the details, and it was a wonderful emotional moment for a very personal reason that she purchased these and had no idea. They are wonderfully, using the word investment, it was a good thing for her to buy, but she sort of fell into it because she loved it. And I think that we are seeing more emotional buying because I think people can. I think we're seeing higher disposable income, and we're seeing increased a group of younger people who are coming up through the marketplace who have money, and they want to buy something that's interesting and that speaks to them.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing that as well? Sort of a more of a diffusion at the lower price point, younger consumer?
Well, it's funny. I think in all the years that I've been doing this, I don't think I've ever had somebody walk into our galleries and say, point out what you think is a good investment. I honestly can't recollect that. For me, it's all about emotional buying. Because a lot of this
Probably because they have an art consultant.
right.
But a lot of this is discretionary, spending. And I think, at the end of the day, people will see something and they'll just immediately resonate with it, or, they'll just say, you know what, that's like my dream object. I have to own that. We were talking about, the amazing Salon hippopotamus bar that we have coming up in our marquee design sales in December. It's on view at Sotheby's right now. It's a marvelous object. It's a unique piece. But collectors are seeing this and, immediately sort of fantasizing about owning it. So I think that's very emotional. And that's what it should be about. It's like, what speaks to you? Where do you find beauty? To collect art and design and jewelry is really a gift and a privilege. And we all see beauty in different areas.
absolutely.
Yeah, I want to say I see genuine interest, and in the last 2 years, I think over 50% of our sales have been to new people, so that's interesting too, and collectors, middle-aged and some younger, and that's been great. That's been great. So unpredictable from a standpoint of having a gallery because you don't know how often they'll buy something or if it's a repeat client or what, but it's been an interesting trend, I have to say.
Dana, I know you mentioned that even here at the booth, you're seeing younger and people coming with their mothers, things like that. Is there a shifting demographic for you? Or is your typical client 60 years old?
I don't know whether we have a typical client, but I think what I did mention to you is that we did, for some reason, this past couple of days, we had a crowd of women with their daughters who wanted them to, I'm always saying fewer, better things. And this was the sort of message that was coming across. Rather than wearing 5 Van Cleef & Arpels Alhambra bracelets, the mothers were encouraging these young women to focus on one really special thing. And from a collection standpoint, from just a sort of intelligent purchase standpoint. And the young women it was a very lovely thing to see because they were very receptive to this.
Because they want things that are different from what everybody else has?
I think the mothers were encouraging their daughters to sort of veer into that direction rather than, a Cartier Love bracelet because everybody in their peer group has one. Let's take that money and let's focus on something that is distinctive. Fewer, better things. But I don't think we do have a typical customer.
Okay, great.
Never have.
Jodi, I had the pleasure of touring the new Sotheby space in the Breyer building, which, the 2 sales that are staged there now, modern and contemporary, which will come up for auction next week, are really stunning in the space. Can you tell us a little bit, there's the Pritzker collection and Leonard Lauder's collection that will come up for sale. How is it in terms of sort of duking it out for the estates now? How is that competition working? And do you think your new old building, is going to be helpful in terms of getting those bigger grand estates?
Well, it's a great question. I think for those of you that have experienced the building, we opened yesterday. It's absolutely marvelous, and I would encourage all of you to go and check it out. We have just incredible art, incredible collections on display there. Through the course of the next 10 days. And our auctions are led by the Leonard Lauder collection, the Pritzker collection, but we have, things from a lot of other really marvelous collections. I do think that, the Breuer is something that, brings in a new era for Sotheby's, and it's just been very energizing. Everyone's reactions to seeing, the art in this amazing space that has always sort of, been dedicated, has this sort of aura of being a sanctuary for art. So it's exciting to, I think if you're a collector, to see your pieces in this museum context. So I do think that it's a really terrific distinguisher for Sotheby's, for all of the collectors, for the different estates that are coming to us. Both houses have amazing collections, really superb material coming up over the next 2 weeks. So I think it's going to be a really important barometer for the art markets. And in terms of your question about all of the collections, the estates that continue to come up, these are obviously very defining benchmarks for the larger art market. And I think what's so interesting over the course of the next few decades, and I think both houses are very focused on this, we're going to be seeing the largest sort of, the largest wealth distribution transfer in history from, the baby boomers to the next generation. And, this is going to have a transformative impact on the art market. Obviously for the auction houses, but everybody in this sort of, general ecosystem, because you're going to have access to some remarkable collections. And obviously, with that wealth transfer, we're all expecting there to be the rise of a new generation of collectors. So, that's what we're all sort of looking forward to, all planning towards. And I think it's, going to continue to play out where every season is going to be really defined by these, really remarkable estates and world-class collections.
Terrific. I'm wondering, with the profusion of new platforms, whether, anything as basic as Instagram to TikTok to blockchain, are you benefiting from increased access across platforms, or is it a hindrance? And I know that Sotheby's was well positioned at the start of COVID because the previous CEO had put a real emphasis on online buying. So is it democratizing all of this access, or is it hindering in any kind of way?
That's an interesting question.
It's a little bit of each.
Yeah, absolutely. The outreach, from my point of view, it certainly increases the outreach because, and it also, everything is transparent now. But I would also warn that everything seems transparent. So with all of these sales at auction, nothing personal, but I do think it'll be a benchmark, but the public prices are newly complicated. So by that I mean there's a financial construct that has been applied to the auction sales that most galleries don't use. There are all these irrevocable bids, and things are a little more complicated and I think private in that sense, even though the objects themselves are more public. So as you say, I think it's a little bit of both. It's like a second job for me, in that even though it's not me doing the posting on Instagram, I have a gallery that is public. You can come and see the works, and especially starting COVID, we not have to, but we post things to make people more aware of us, to do that kind of outreach. So at times it feels like a second job because a little part of me says, well, why don't you just come over and look at it? But that's not the world right now. So
Right.
I'm with you, Jill. I find that it can be a full-time job.
yeah.
And it is a mixed blessing in the sense that a lot of the pieces that a lot of our pieces should not be on Instagram. People
The
want
privacy
them to
of
be
the
private.
transaction is something you
It's
and I
private.
probably share. I know the auction house is doing much more private sales too. So that's the part of it that it really relies on one-on-one transaction. It's the client and me, and they're asking me questions, and I'm telling them things that they're going to remember, and that's why they're going to buy the thing or not. So it does interrupt that a bit, but
I don't think that ever will change. I
Yeah.
think people need
the
that.
people, yeah.
And in our world, they need the tactile, the sensation of trying something on. So even if they make a decision remotely, they still want that engagement.
And the person, I find that clients that come in want to talk to me, and I'm telling them things, I'm showing them my experience. I wonder if that's the same with auctions because it's harder to contact the experts. I mean, I know there's more private sale going on, but it's a little bit of a different look. But I definitely, and the fun of it for me is the relationships I have with my clients, both on the selling side and on the buying side. That's a big part of it.
Great. And I'm sure that's you.
Definitely. May I ask a question?
Yes,
I'm
please.
really curious to know which single owner collections are coming up in your jewelry department.
Well, you should call your friend Frank Everett for
I
that.
yes.
Because I'm not the best one to ask.
Yeah, he gave me a little glimpse, but I was curious to know if you wanted to.
But going back to this question, I think it's really fascinating because there's so many different facets of how to look at this, because we're all like so overwhelmed with like just the vast amount of information that's out there, and there's so many avenues. And I was sort of listening to everyone's commentary, and I think there's good and there's bad. There's certain resources, like ArtNet, for instance, where, everybody obviously like has access to ArtNet, and you could go and you can look at, the pricing comparables for everything. But, what's not there is, there's no tools out there online that are going to tell you how to decipher that information and data. And that's really where, your true expertise and market intelligence come, to play, because you could be looking at, pricing comparables, but, you don't really understand how to interpret that. So, I think a lot of this information can be frankly misrepresented, misused, and there's sort of a risk in that. And again, this business we're all in, regardless if you're a dealer, an auction house, a gallerist. It's all about relationships, and I think clients trust in your expertise and the advice that you're giving, and that obviously is something that the data that we're all seeing online, whether it's Instagram or ArtNet, all of this. I feel like the relationships are what sort of transcend that and supersede that. But I do think that technology has really changed our world. Like when I think about pre-COVID, post-COVID, that was really transformational. I mean, my department, I think back, it was March 2020, and we were just it was the onset of COVID. And, like you said, our former CEO, Tad Smith, had really invested in the infrastructure, the digital technology at Sotheby. So we were able to make this pivot very seamlessly to moving all of our sales online. But, it was very stressful, and there was, a lot of learnings. And I will never forget, we had a design sale where I think the low estimate must have been in the low millions. And everybody was home and captive and, glued to their screens. And, out of nowhere, this sale absolutely exploded and was one of the most successful sales that we ever had, where it was, I think it was at least 3 or 4 times the pre-sale estimates. And, the biggest transformation that we've seen post-COVID is, our investment in all of these digital channels where, pre-COVID, we were still investing in printed catalogs and printed advertising. And, if you're going to print, let's say, 1,000 copies of a catalog, that really limits to who you're reaching and engaging with. Whereas if you're going to invest in digital advertising and social media, it's infinite. It's unbelievable, like the transformation that has had on us. And, I'm proud to say that Sotheby's is really the industry leader in that space. We have, I think, 7.5 million followers through all of these different, social media channels, and it's really transformed our business. Where every season, every sale, we're seeing new people that have never transacted with us coming in, and clearly we're engaging, we're reaching them through these different avenues.
Do you have any sense of what percentage of those followers translates into an actual buyer or seller? Excuse me.
No, good, please.
No, it's a great question. I don't have the exact,
Sure,
number,
but
it's
myself.
I wonder that too.
Yeah.
And I think a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing, because I think what we found is that people go on ArtNet or they see auction results and they come back to us and they say, wow, that Boivin starfish sold for $300,000, and they forget that there was a buyer's premium and there was tax, and or that it might not be relevant. It might be a Boivin starfish that had different paperwork, different provenance, different variables. And so to both of your points, I think the interaction, the authenticity factor, and the input is very, very important. Because just looking at those numbers, which are so readily available, it's allowed for transparency, but that needs to be differentiated, articulated.
To your question, it's really remarkable. We do track for every one of our sales, people that are entirely new transactors to Sotheby's or new to that category. And I will say that statistic continues to rise. I think it's very challenging to know exactly the channel that they are finding us, because we're putting out such a wide net. But I mean, one story that I think is absolutely remarkable, in June of 2023, in one of our London modern evening auctions, we put, video has become a really integral part of our promotional campaigns. And we had a marvelous video about a very important Gustave Klimt painting that was coming up at auction. And, it turned out that a collector saw this video and was in touch with us by virtue of seeing this video and had never transacted before at Sotheby's. And, this is not, something that was, $10,000, $20,000. This was a painting that ended up selling for $108 million. And this collector was the direct underbidder, and again, was activated by virtue of seeing and engaging with that video, which was really remarkable.
Wow.
We had an experience where an amateur video was circulated at a show we did, and somebody in Texas contacted us through a third party because they wanted to buy a bird on a rock, Schlumberger pin, which you probably all know which this piece of jewelry is. They're very popular, and Tiffany is reproducing them. And we were able to make a very large sale. And we had no idea who this person was, but it was...
So interesting. I'm going to ask one more bonus question, and then we can open it up because I'm sure people have interesting things to ask of you. Question for each of you. What, if you had to pick one work from the show that's currently on view in your gallery, what would that be?
To keep?
Mm-hmm.
I have a Picasso drawing from 1945 of Dora Maar that is a portrait drawing. Picasso wrote a surrealist play in 1945 that was performed in the middle of the occupation during the war and directed by Albert Camus. It's supposedly terrible. Gertrude Stein cracked that he should stick to painting. He took the drawing of Dora Maar, affixed it to a manuscript of the play, and gave it to her. She kept it until 2008 when it was sold at auction to a private collection. So that's what I would
That would
keep.
be your choice.
Yeah.
Jodi, how about you? What, I mean, so much choice over there on view
Well,
right
I'm
now.
I'm gonna selfishly, speak about my sales that are coming
No,
up in
that's what I'm
December.
saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have some marvelous collections coming up, but the centerpiece of our Design Week sales is the Schlumberger collection of Lalande and Design. And we have, an incredible piece by Lalande that the market will never see again. I actually didn't even know that it existed until I visited the Schlumberger's home in Houston, Texas. And it is a unique hippopotamus bar, hand fabricated by the artist. It was a unique commission by Anne Schlumberger in 1976. And it essentially serves as the prototype and the precursor for the later edition that was to be executed in bronze. But we have it out on view at the Breuer. It's just a fantastic object. You really, when you're standing in front of it, get to appreciate the artist's process of first starting with, drawing the subject and how that translates, into the fabrication of the piece, line to form. It's just really engaging and fun and bold and, endearing. You love it, the moment you see it. So that would be my pick.
Okay. And Dana, if you were taking anything out of your case, what would it be? What's the most
I think the
spectacular?
hardest part about what I do is disciplining myself to part with things because there are so many things I'd like to keep. We had a Belperron suite, Suzanne Belperron suite, and I'm especially partial to women designers and especially to Suzanne Belperron, who very bravely carried on. She worked for the house of René Boivin, and during the war years, a house called Hertz manufactured much of her designs, and Monsieur Hertz was carted off by the Nazis and killed, and Suzanne was able to carry on the business as a woman during the war years, and with Hertz's son, and her pieces are highly collectible, and when we have them, they sell. So the answer is, unfortunately, I sold the piece that I really would like to keep. But having said that, I did bring this Boivin starfish, and this is from the house of René Boivin. And this is a design by Juliette Moutard, who is also a woman designer, who designed for the house of Boivin. And this is circa 1940. And we are actually showing this on a choker because everybody seems to want chokers these days. And pins are maybe a little bit less popular. So it's a very versatile piece, and you can wear it on your décolleté, you can wear it in your hair, you can wear it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful piece. So I may hold on to this.
Terrific. Thank you. Would anybody else like to ask a question of our experts here on Panelists?
I'm curious to know how each of you, if you are, trying to capture that rising collector base of, younger collector base.
In my case, I specialize in 19th century and early 20th century works on paper, so I've done a series of exhibitions that have contemporary works like Delacroix next to a Peter Doig, or now we have a show that has Pizarro and Kiki Smith in an effort to show people that the art is all connected, and that collectors who are looking know more about Kiki Smith than I do will come and look and maybe see a Picasso drawing. So that's what we've been trying to do for a while.
We're expanding our expertise. We're seeing more young people coming to us for custom pieces, and we're doing everything from engagement rings to, my mother owns a Boivin starfish, and I'd like something like that. What can we create together? Which is exciting.
I think it also depends on how you define young, because and also the segment of the market that you're talking about. But we do have at least once a year what we call our mid-season design sale, and all of the art departments generally will have mid-season auctions and also online sales that will start at much more approachable price points. And for us, that might be $800, $1,000 and up. And I think that's a really nice way to actually make things more approachable to people that are in their 20s, their 30s. I think generally when you're looking at things at much higher price points in our marquee sales, we're generally catering towards, I would say, people in their 40s, 50s, and older. And sort of, the major sort of, event that I find as a catalyst for people is, certainly in the design world, because we're dealing with furniture and lighting and such, is when people are establishing homes and they're really leaning into decorating their homes. Obviously, that is going to, cultivate them into buying and really focusing certainly on my market and also on art collecting.
Anybody else?
We're also seeing more men and among our clientele, and they tend to be young men, and to your point, 40, late 30s, who really want to delve into the jewelry world and know more and give something important perhaps to their partner. And I think because of the nature of our business, because we are private, a lot of men tend to shy away from a retail experience or an auction experience. They feel more comfortable with a one-on-one experience where we can keep it private and low-key, and they can learn. So it's an exciting thing to do business that way too.
Terrific. Well, if we don't have any more questions, thank you all very much for your time.
Thank
I feel
you.
like I've learned a lot, so I'm sure we all have. Thank you for coming. And
Did you have a question?
So one of the things I'm greatly interested in is how canons evolve or expand. And so I'm especially piqued for Dana, but for all of you, I think you've addressed it a bit more. How do you deal with, so you've mentioned Van Cleef, Cartier, Belperron, etc. How does that repertoire broaden for you and come up in time? Whether it's, I mean, I know you've mentioned Hammerly, etc., but people like, I don't know, Nicholas Varney, Firmanovich, I don't know, but I'm wondering your thoughts on that, as well as for you, how you see a canon evolving in light of what's being made.
Lisa, I think, I have always been interested in distinctive design, and I think it's most interesting to mix it up. Sort of like wearing head-to-toe Chanel can be a bit trite. It's nice to wear a Gap t-shirt mixed with an Yves Saint Laurent jacket. And I try to work with upcoming designers, and you mentioned Nicholas Varney is one of them, Sylvia Firmanovich is one of them, Nikos Koulis is another one. And I come to these events and I go to auctions and I go to galleries to put my finger on the pulse of whose work is interesting and emerging. And we tend to be very collegial and work together. And I find that our customers are looking for that. They like to mix it up. Some of my colleagues are very strict and they stick to, what's expected, but I like surprise. And so I very much am focused on that. I don't know if I answered your question. But.
To a degree it did. I think it's really important because part of that is how you, if you will, bring along the client as well to
Well, yeah, I think that that's our job. I mean, on the West Coast, for example, we have a very good customer who was trying to build a collection, and I think we all tend to help people do that. And I, quote unquote, introduced her to Sylvia Furmanovich, and I introduced them personally because she didn't understand what Sylvia does, which is a lot of which is marquetry and work with wood. But that was part of the exciting process was explaining to her why wood jewelry could cost as much as gold and diamonds because of the design component and because Sylvia has become collectible and prominent and because these pieces can live side by side and be worn side by side very effectively.
Interesting.
And remind me your question as it pertains to design.
It was really about, if you will, broaden the canon and how you respond to what is going on right now, sort of positioning people next to whoever you want to cite, Ruhlman, From, etc. Just thinking about that. And of course, the poor arts and crafts movement.
Well, I think there's definitely been a greater lean in from collectors to post-war and contemporary design. But that said, I go back to like my comments on eclecticism, and collectors really being open to mixing things, taking a Tiffany lamp and putting it next to a Basquiat or Warhol, or next to a great antiquarian old master painting. No rules really apply today. So we try to open people's eyes to these things, and a lot of it is the way that we frame and position things, certainly in our catalogs and our exhibitions, to inspire collectors of how they can live with these things and how they can mix and not sort of collect in silos, that it's okay to put a great piece of Ruhlman next to a piece of Prouvé, or to take a piece of, frankly, 18th century Americana and put it next to a piece of contemporary art or a piece by Mark Newson. I think there has been, some really remarkable collectors that have, been visionaries for going back several generations. Peter Brandt is one that comes to mind. Pauline Karpitis, we just sold her collection, part of her collection in London. Reed and Delphine Krakoff, where even decades ago they had the vision to be able to see how you can position something from the 18th century next to something from the 20th or 21st. And to me, that's really where it gets exciting. I mean, I love that kind of mixing. And again, it allows the collector, I think, to really show their taste level and their own personality, their own imprint on their collections. So we're always looking for opportunities to actually show collections that have all of this variety in it as a collection, so people can see how they lived with these things from different generations, different time periods, genres. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, the inclination, if we were looking at a collection that had all different categories, including jewelry or luxury and art and decorative arts and design, we may have been inclined to actually divide that up into categories to make sure that we were catering to those specific markets. Today, it's very different, and we have a much more holistic approach where more often than not, we are actually taking a collection that might include, 5 or 6 different categories and coming up with a strategy, a vision to be able to showcase it holistically in its entirety. Because, frankly, that's how people want to see things presented, and that's how they're pursuing their own collections. So I think it's a great, very insightful question.
Terrific. Okay, thank you all again for sharing your time and insights, and thank you all for coming.